Welcome everyone to this practice outside in nature. I'd like to welcome not only all the people but also all the places, all of the nature around the world that we're sharing. Now, out of respect for that nature, this practice is really about listening. So the idea there is that we've come not just to take but to share. So in a sense we're offering presence. So this is a kind of a minimum, really. But that in itself means it's not possible to just watch this video. So if you're inside, schedule some time when you can be out. The video is available all through the rest of the conference. And take part, because it's from the experience that you will understand what this is really about. And this is very, very basic in a sense and very immediate. So we can look at how we understand and process our experience, starting with sensation. What do we receive of the world and others? And perception, what do we do with that information? Cognition, how we think about it. Language, how we structure that. And then how we act upon that too. It's not necessarily linear either. Language can even affect what we sense. So we will look a lot today about things like the way our sensing can be conditioned. For example, gaze, vision and touch. And how if we have a habit of sensing, how we're already limiting the information we're actually receiving in each moment about the world. And then we're left much more to things like our imagination, expectations and beliefs, and without that necessarily being challenged. So this is really a moment-by-moment practice to give us a reference to be receiving enough information in each moment. So otherwise it would be like you're hungry and you go out and watch people eating. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And what would you understand about that food? How would that nourish you? How would the food taste? So this is the same. This experience is about the exchange and how we exchange. So we can start to see there are actually a lot of choices. There are a lot of options in the way we relate, and how through conditioning, through lifestyle, we can sometimes really develop a habit like watching a flat screen all the time and focusing. And as we know from neuroscience, what we don't use, we lose. So we start to diminish the other capacities. And we're going to look at some of those today as well. One of the things that will really help you a lot is to have bare feet. So if you're not used to that, pick a terrain that's not too challenging. A little bit of challenge is good. And just try it for as long as you can manage. Or you can put your shoes on if you have to, and we will run around at some point, and then if you need to take the shoes, take them. But the more you do that, the more the capacity will come back, because we were not born or evolved to wear shoes. So we are able, it just takes the practice. Otherwise, imagine you would have a relationship or a conversation without receiving the other. How would we understand the other without that possibility? So it's the same with shoes. If we walk only on a homogenized surface, like in a city, wearing shoes, we lose the natural curiosity and the need to really listen to the ground. So as soon as you're walking bare feet, somewhere like the forest, as soon as you come to something that's a little more challenging, you'll need to respond, or it can become too difficult. So you might have to slow down. If you come to some rocks, you might have to pause or even back off. So immediately you start to be in a reciprocal relationship. It's not only me acting, but nature has an agency that is acting upon me, and then something starts to really be very different. And that's what we're looking at today. Okay, so what I would like to start with is a couple of simple questions. And for the first question, notice your immediate response. So what comes first? And it's a very basic question. Where are you? So how did you answer that? And if you like, post it in the comments, especially come back to this question at the end of the practice to see how you answer that question again. For many of us, it will be with the words, especially the name of the place, for example, or a way to describe the place, or describing the atmosphere or the emotional connection, the physical, whatever it may be. There's so many ways to describe this where. So, what we'll look at today is what we call direct experience, and sometimes this is even before the words. So in the sensing, what we call haptic cognition, you already know something, and this can be quite profound. This can inform you in a very different way what you understand from the experience. So this is where we'll be spending a lot of time expanding this direct experience out before we do a lot with it, before we interpret it or judge it or put the words even. It's a very useful place to hang out, and especially somewhere like this where we can be receiving something even before we know what it is, before we have to put the words to it. So the other question goes a little bit deeper into that where question, and this is about your boundary, your permeability. How much do you sense your boundary being permeable? Or another way to phrase that question would be, how much do you really sense the atmosphere of this place and feel you're responding to that? Spending a lot of time inside or in urban situations can be quite confusing for our boundary. Coming back to the example with the feet, you know, in each step, my boundary is having to be responded. It's selectively permeable. It's modulating appropriately. And this is so healthy. This is such a useful practice because we're calling upon like an intelligence, the intelligence of the membrane in the cell even, or in a boundary, in a larger structure. So this is a very helpful way also to deal with some boundary issues. And speaking of that, we'll begin with a little preparation. For those of you who've come from an urban situation, from being inside, it can be helpful to have a way to support the transition of the nervous system. And what we're also looking to do is to shift from not only observing from the nervous system, but from a more fully embodied state in the experience. So let's start with this boundary question by feeling the skin. Now, what I suggest you do is just stimulate the skin all over your body, and whatever you need to do to help with that feeling. But this is already listening, so you'll notice as you stimulate the skin that in some places it feels different. It has a different quality, so observe that. And you can even use the nature to help, because this really helps me to be much more curious and to feel here. This is like contact improvisation with the nature. So I start to feel actually not only my skin, but I can go deeper to the flesh to feel the state of that boundary. And you can even start to take it a step further and roll very slowly, so you have time to be very present in the contact. And here there's a lot of stimulation on my skin, and it very much helps to wake up that feeling of permeability. Can I receive all of this impression? And noticing how that is, where it's more or less clear. So at this point you can pause the video and take some time with this. You know, you'll notice that there's a process as well. There's a process that happens, and the more familiar, the more often, the more familiar you can become with that process, how you're shifting from one state to the other. So use the nature around to help you with that part of the practice, that preparation. And another element to support the nervous system are the fluids, and we'll look just briefly touching in upon two of those fluids, and one is the blood and the other one is lymph. So first of all, the blood, which can help when you are very much full of information, kind of you're having to process a lot of information and you don't feel a lot of space for new information to come. So this is like if you imagine a ship and a big wave comes and washes everything off the deck. Suddenly it's free, there's space for new information to come. So what we want here is to be able to support a very easy receiving, because there is so much information here, and my system is very attuned to being able to do that, but I might need to clear the other information first. So the simple way to work with the blood, because there are two main elements. We have the arterial blood that pumps from the heart out, which is also supporting the acting in the world, and the venous return, the venous rhythm, which is flowing back from the periphery to the heart, also supporting my receiving. So, to stimulate the heart, let's start to be very, very energetic. So running around. And run around to get your heart pumping. But not only running around, start to interact. And interacting with the environment. So you come into contact and then you're moving again. Take your shoes if you need to help. Spend a few minutes to do this. Pause the video to get your heart really pumping and then pause. And as you pause, place your hand on your heart. Feel your pulse. Everything is also pulsating in its own rhythm. Feel your heartbeat, the sense of your blood pumping out in this arterial rhythm. And notice how there's a beat, there's substance and space, substance and space. It's a very clear, accented beat. Take some moments until your pulse is more resting again. And we'll switch to the other element, the venous rhythm, which is very different. It doesn't have this accented beat. It's much more like a whoosh flowing back, and more like a cyclic wave that's kind of continuous. Doesn't really stop, it's just rising and falling. And that we can also use movement. So start with like a pendulum with your limbs, swinging the limb down into gravity with weight, and then up into the lightness of the space. So you come more to the ground and gravity, and then suspension. So playing with weight and rarity, and then even take that into movement. So again, the rhythm is very different. It's more like a waltz with the forest. Dipping down and coming up. And this endless, continuous, cyclic wave. And you're receiving also. What's coming back? In a very easy way. How is this experience compared to the arterial? Is it more or less accessible? Again, spend a bit more time with that, also in movement. And then again, pause to observe if one is still more in the front, or is it possible to experience both rhythms at the same time? So as we clear the information, you may already notice it's a little easier. Suddenly you may start to see a bit more the depth, the atmosphere. And then the lymph. The lymph doesn't have a pulse. It's much more steady, more like a tide flowing. And because it flows from the periphery back towards the center of the body, it can give us a clear sense of boundary and actually supports very much spatial perception, which is very useful for today. Now, we're going to take a very simplified practice. If you have issues with lymph, check with your therapist first. Usually with lymph, we'd actually just take the skin and move the skin, but we're going to stroke very lightly because what we're looking for is also a listening touch, encouraging this receiving. Now the lymph, when it comes back, just beneath the collarbones, it flows back into the circulation of blood. So it becomes blood. Some of that mostly gets pumped out as blood, and then it will come back either as venous or it comes back as lymph. So this lymph coming back is also supporting the venous return too. But we need to start here because this gateway where the lymph passes back into the blood circulation can be more or less open. So we want to check that it's able to flow. So rub your hands quite vigorously to make them really nice and warm. And once your hands are warm, place them there over the collarbones. Feel the warmth touching your skin. Feel how it spreads and softens the flesh. And then rub them again to make them nice and warm. Feel that warmth softening, spreading even to the bones, or beneath the muscles and bones, to that space. So we're looking for, as if there's like an underground river flowing, there's something beginning to flow back. And then we'll begin with very light, short strokes, starting from the fingertips, working your way up. So you don't really press into the flesh, it's only just beneath the skin, a very light stroke, but you're listening. So, listening without over-focusing, I stay with a more peripheral attitude, aware of the nature around. And actually I can still listen very clearly. So notice in some places it may seem to flow more or less clearly or easily. And that's very therapeutic actually. You're not trying to force anything, just by listening. And this receiving, I'm encouraging this flow. So take your time to work your way up the arm. It's very soothing for the nervous system. Also a little across the shoulder. How does it flow here? Is the arm connected in a fluid way? And you can take a very light reach into the space to encourage that coming back. And with the second arm, or if the limb feels very heavy, you can suspend it so you don't have to hold it up. And then also even using gravity, but listening. And notice if you go into a habit of exclusive focusing, because for many of us that is so conditioned, and that's not presence, that's an exclusive attention. So here I stay with a more peripheral attitude, and I can still feel. So take your time to work your way, listening. How is it here? How is it here? And what about across? How does this arm connect in a fluid way? And then the same thing with the legs. And I would suggest you sit for this. And again, if you need to, just suspend the leg on something. But it's the same. You start at the tips of the toes. And what about here? What about here? What about in the back of the knee as you come up the inside of the thigh? How does it flow? So remember, it's a listening touch. And you stay with this easy peripheral attitude. What about across the groin? How does the leg connect to the rest of the body? And the same with the other side. Now, again, it can help to have a light reach into the space. So I try to just feel how there's actually the possibility for two directions. That the more I have this feeling of something flowing back, the easier it is to reach out into the space. And the more clear my reach into the space, the more this flow comes back very easy. And this is very useful to get to notice, because if the reach is too willful, I start to grip and too much tension is blocking this flow coming back. My stretching fragments the body rather than consolidating. So again, what about across the groin? How does it flow? And you can even try that with gravity assisting. So, do you have a feeling of something flowing through all the volume, especially through the hips and shoulders, unrestricted? If it's not clear, then feel the ground. Is the ground there? What do you feel of the ground under your back? The lightness of the space. You can even put strings to hang or hang from a branch, so you don't have to hold your body. Your body is just relating to ground and space, and then the flow is easier. I'm not with my will controlling, restricting this relationship with the country. You can bend the limbs more if you struggle with that one. And then spend a few moments there. And when you're ready, come to sit. And let's come back to the skin. So, feel the skin of your whole body. And the skin is the meeting of inside and out. So to feel your skin, again, it can help if I'm actually aware of the outside as well as the inside. And as you breathe, can you feel your skin breathing? The skin has little pores, just like little mouths. In the same way that the leaves of a tree has stoma, stomata, which are where the exchange happens. So imagine all of these little mouths of your pores breathing. So it's not just an internal focus. This is about the exchange. And where do you sense there's a little expanding and condensing, a swelling and receding of your skin? Where is that more or less clear? Spend some time. And where you don't feel it at all, you can go back to stimulate the skin through the contact, through something a little more dynamic, some light with the leaves or something like bark or stone, whatever, to help wake up the skin. So how permeable do you feel now to the atmosphere of this place? We will really look a lot at touch and the gaze, but not to forget there is the sound space, which is invisible behind me, but I can hear it. There's the smell space, all of which I receive inside. Even the tactile space, if there's a little breeze, to feel that on your skin. So the main practice for today really will start with the gaze, and with a very simple element, and then we'll look later at how we can deconstruct the gaze for those of us who have, for example, an objectified way of seeing. And it's not necessarily that one is good or bad, but we need to have all the choices available. And also because the gaze, the way we sense, is so often telling us a lot about our state of mind, and that's so informative. So we'll begin with this basic element of focal vision and peripheral vision, which are very different. This information we process in different ways. So what that means is, not only do we can have a habit of sensing, but we can have a habit of perception. This is giving us such a different experience. It's the same information out there, but the way I'm receiving it and what I'm doing with it changes my experience. Classically, we talk about focal vision as being object recognition, and peripheral vision is much more about orientation. Where am I? Two very different questions. So I can answer the question where by looking at something and naming it, or I can answer the question more with my sense of orientation. But that in itself is a little biased. As we'll look at later, focal vision doesn't have to be this separate subject-object. There is a way with haptic cognition to be in much more of this reciprocal experience where I start to be touched inside by what it is I'm receiving, rather than it's something separate from me, or even something aesthetic that I'm looking at as an object. So, focal vision, and what I recommend you do for this, because it's so familiar for most of us, to give a little more the sense of what this really means, is let's take it into movement. So you can start to observe if something changes in the movement quality. So begin to walk, and as you walk, start to focus. To focus exclusively on something, and then on something else. Look at its detail. I don't want to influence you too much, but maybe you have the word. What's that called? But just stay with that focusing, and notice, does that affect your quality of movement, or your breath, or your state of mind? How does it feel? Again, for many of us it's so familiar, this may not be clear until we explore the difference. So focusing on something. You can even go towards it if you like, and then focus on something else, and really as exclusive as possible. what many of us are spending so much time with these days. And then pause. And let's look at the other option, the other part of the gaze. So peripheral vision, one of the simplest ways actually is just to take your hands, and movement helps as well. But what we'll do is to see if we can open up this whole peripheral field by what I'm doing here is tracing, even though I'm looking straight ahead, I'm tracing the edge of my field of vision with the hands. Okay, so where can I only just see them without actually looking at them? This is, in a sense, very easy. I just receive the information. I don't have to look to see where are my hands. But I'm aware that there's something right at the edge of my field of vision. Now, as you trace that, what you'll notice is it's more like an oval. Actually, not even that. It's wider at the horizons. It narrows a little bit as we go up. And then as we come down, it also extends a little more as well. So take a bit of time with that. This is actually used in karate, for example, in a kata, as a preparation for fighting. Why? Because this is about how we deal with fight-flight, how we deal with challenges and stress. And we can often go, as a response, into this, it's even called weapon focus, exclusive focal vision, to see what is that. But stay with the peripheral vision and begin to walk without having to look out so much to see. It's just very easy. You receive the light. Now, one of the useful things, if you have a nature where you have trees or rocks or some terrain, you'll start to notice something quite remarkable as you walk, that you are moving in relationship. There's you and there's all of this elements, and your relationship is constantly changing with the country. So stay with that. If you lose the peripheral vision, notice, for many of us this is such an ingrained habit, it can seem like an effort to come back. But that effort is just telling you that it's a habit, and the capacity is maybe a little diminished. And the more you come back, the easier it will be. Peripheral vision is very easy. I just receive. So does something change in the quality of your movement, in your state of mind, in your breath? This is not good or bad. This is just to experience the difference. And that color may have to do more with your experience than the thing itself. If it's not clear, just switch backwards and forwards. Go back to focal vision now as you walk. Spend a few breaths there and then switch back to peripheral. So keep doing that. You may notice sometimes you have more what we call integrated vision, which is both focal and peripheral. So once you've played with that for a little bit, just continue to walk and to observe whether you're more focal, more peripheral. Try to just let it be. This is, in a sense, a rite of passage, learning to observe, to witness without changing or affecting. It's the same with the breath. You will learn a lot more just by doing that, by being present without having to change something, just observing the way it is in each moment. So pause the video and just walk for a while with the gaze, observing whether you're more peripheral or focal, and then come back. So the next element, which is very much related, we actually use the word haptic for the gaze as well as touch. And what we're looking at now to understand this element is that there's two possibilities when we come to look at touch. One is to touch something, and the other one is to receive the impression, to be touched, which are actually two very different experiences. Even here we can have an exclusive habit of touching only. In the extreme we become touch blind. We don't really receive, and especially through the feet. So let's explore this and both parts, so it starts to become more clear for you, the difference as well. If you put your hands together and just notice the contact, you can be present in the skin, in the flesh, without having to exclusively focus. You can really stay. I have this incredible bird reminding me to stay. And I can still feel my hands. Actually, sometimes even more clearly. Now notice the contact, the quality of contact. Is one hand more dominant or not? Can you feel if it's more of a touching or a being touched, or both, or is it not clear, the distinction? Okay, so let's play with that, because that can help to exercise the choice that is diminished. So with the left hand touch and with the right hand receive. You don't really do anything physically, it's just in the intention. My right hand is being touched and I feel the impression, and the left hand is touching. Now, because this practice is all about a more peripheral attitude and presence rather than focal, this is not one or the other. Can you feel both at the same time? Is one more clear? So take a few breaths there and then switch the other way. Take a few breaths and switch. So you start to observe if both choices are available, or does one seem to take more effort or come with a hesitation or needs more willing. And remember, that doesn't tell you about the nature of that sensing, but it may tell you about your habit, that you're not receiving so much. When you give your hand to someone, do you really receive the other? You know, you can play with that. It may be easier to receive a tree than a stranger. I don't know for you, but here I receive, if I don't put so much weight, I can really start with the skin, the flesh, and go deeper and deeper. And as I give more weight, to receive the tree really into my body from the ground. But continue with that switching. After a while, just pause and notice the contact again. Did something shift? Is one hand more dominant? Is it more touching or being touched, or both, or still not clear? If it's not clear, come back to that simple exercise, and then we can try the same thing with the feet. So what I can recommend you do here is place the soles of the feet together. And if that's not comfortable for you, then you can do this lying down on your back, or raise your bottom on something a little higher. But again, notice the contact, and we are defining a relationship through all of this practice, so you can notice when you're present and when maybe you start to think about something else distracts you, your attention becomes more exclusive, and that's part of the practice too. So can you stay present in that contact and also stay present here with the country? Is one foot more dominant? Is it more a touching or a being touched? Or both? Or not so clear? So let's play the same game. With the left foot you touch, and with the right foot you receive. Curious, as if you don't know what another foot feels like. We don't even need the word foot. What is the impression? Take some breaths and then change. Listening, observing. When you go, exclusive focus. When you come back, can you feel if both choices are available, or is one more tricky? That's where you need to spend time. And again, for most of us, wearing shoes, walking on a homogenized surface, we diminish. We don't need to be curious. We don't need to listen. So we need to pick a terrain that's going to kind of provoke, in a sense, or ask us, are you there? Are you responding? And then pause and notice again the quality of contact. Did something shift? And then come to stand. And notice as you come to stand, there's the ground. And no matter what you know of ground, just observe in this moment the impression of what's touching your skin. And there's a texture, there's a temperature, there's a shape touching the flesh. It's a little deeper. There's the nature of this humidity. Here it rained a couple of days ago, but I can still feel something in the ground beneath that's deeper, that has been touched by the water. So these impressions you can receive actually not only in the feet, but in the legs, through your whole body. And then as you walk, your whole body is responding to the impression. I can receive, and this is not an unfamiliar experience. This is not something that only indigenous people experience. As a baby, you build your body, and we call it proprioception, by receiving the other. If I receive the tree in my wrist, in my arm, I start to feel my arm more clearly. Now I can feel my spine more clearly, even into the leg. And once you establish this relationship, you can observe how much possibility do you have to negotiate your position. Can you start to move, again, like a contact improvisation, and not lose the connection? So play with that one for a while. And then let's take it back into movement. But as you start to walk, let the gaze not be so primary if possible. Shift more to your feet. You know, some indigenous peoples are not primary visual. They actually use, for example, hearing. If you're in a cloudy forest and never see the horizon, you're listening with your ears. What you don't hear is invisible. So use your feet like your eyes. See with your feet now. And go at a speed where you can listen. So you're receiving the ground. The ground is something you can receive. It's either out there, or you can start to actually use your whole body, which can then respond. It took a lot of time for this, and when you're ready, including also the peripheral vision, noticing how in each moment you are more or less present in this exchange. When do you shift? When do you become more focal or occupied with something emotional, something in your head, something physical in your body, something from the past or the future. This is a very natural form of therapy. So when something comes up, check, oh, did I lose my presence with something more than? Another way to do that is to go with a friend for a walk in nature. And as you start to talk, observe, whenever you lose this more than presence, just pause in the talking and see what changes in the nature of the dialogue. You know, one of the best ways to understand the meaning of your experience is to speak from that place, to be heard from that place with another. So that's another great way to start to understand what this practice really means. And this is a simple version, but in itself very useful. You can take it into life and especially notice how you lose it. That's a very useful thing to start to observe as well. How do you lose this experience when you go back into everyday life? So let's look a little more at the gaze, in a sense deconstructing. For those of us who are very conditioned into an objective gaze, which can sometimes even be there's the landscape and it's beautiful. And maybe I'm touched by it, but in some sense there is a separation. There's a subject and an object. So the first thing, as you start, and even with focal vision you can try this, as you see something, could you, in a sense, step back from needing to know what it is, the word, and actually allow this to touch you? What do you experience inside as you receive this other? So we start to break down in this haptic experience, this separation. It's different, but it's the same in some ways. So this is a very important process with people too, that we start to see the other, the similarities and the differences. We start to take the projections and be able to separate them out. So shift to something else. Could you just receive and notice, what do you experience? That means, before I know what it is, before I have the word, I accept to be touched. Are you willing, do you accept to be touched by this thing that you don't know? Of course, it's pretty safe here. We're in nature, in the forest. This is a great place to explore this feeling. I can trust. Spend some time with that. Noticing when you see something and it becomes an object, you grip on it, let it go, and instead make this connection, receiving the other and noticing how you respond inside to this thing that is touching you. So this element of touch now comes into the gaze. Another step is to start to notice, as you are seeing, are you seeing things? You know, we have a predominance in English, in most Indo-European languages, of nouns. In some indigenous languages there's more verbs. So what am I seeing? Am I seeing a tree, which is a fixed thing? Jack, Jill, am I seeing this fixed person? Never. We're always seeing process. So the word can affect what we see. This is treeing. I make it a verb. It's something that's in a process. This is helpful because even if you look at a rock, it will challenge you to shift out of your time scale into thousands of years. You watch a rock and it's a process. So start to look around and observe, if you see something, what is that process? What is that process? Someone you know, they're not fixed, they're in a process. Everything. So take some time with that practice now, and then come back. And another step for the gaze to deconstruct is to notice when you see something. Are you seeing something in isolation, or do you see it as part of a relationship? Very important. This is also an element of cognition that is happening. So I'm not seeing an isolated object, but I'm seeing a relationship, and I understand something very different. So if I see a leaf, what do I see? I also see the sun. I see the wind moving that leaf. If I look closely, I might see an insect that's living there. So start to look around, walking around, and noticing when you see something. Are you seeing it as a thing in isolation? If so, challenge yourself. What is this related to? Here the breeze is coming up and I see the wind moving, the heather. I hear these birds in relationship, and they're relating to this forest. So start to look around and find out, because this is not often one relation, it's many relationships. Spend some time. So you can start to observe the quality, the nature of your gaze. And in a sense, we're also stepping back from the words, having to name things. This direct experience, I'm just receiving, and then I see, oh, it's a tree. But before that, I'm just receiving, curious, like I would see my friend for the first time. This is the way relationship stays alive, being curious and receiving a moment-by-moment impression, and noticing when I project something fixed, a fixed picture. So let's go back to walking. And as you walk with peripheral vision, receiving the ground from the feet, through the legs, through your body, and observing this changing relationship all the time to the space and whatever is there in the space. How, as you're walking closer to something, there's a change in the relationship. So observe that. It's constantly changing. This is such a useful thing to become familiar with, because we don't really have that with exclusive focal vision. And you can start to notice on one side that changing relationship, or on the other side. It can be quite different, or both together as you move, or even behind. What about the space behind you? Or if you have a friend with you, how much space is there between you? And especially, there is space above you. Are you aware of that? Can you move and stay with that space and with the ground? And eventually, all around. So in the beginning, this experience can seem to be more egocentric, but the more we become present in this space, it becomes more ecocentric. So I start to be very much relating to this space between me and the other. It's a relational space. The Japanese have a word for it. The Samoans have a word for it. The Maori have a word for it. It's sacred in some cultures. So be present in the space. And it may be a challenge. So just keep coming back in an easy way. And notice when you go back to a more egocentric. Because as you start to move in relationship, you'll notice how there's the landscape and just a dot moving through it. But you're both. You're not isolated. You're also part of this landscape. And I use the word landscape because I forget. It's the country. So let go of all of that information and just walk. Now, as you walk and you start to soak up the atmosphere and to respond in each step, the country starts to walk you. So you can come back to that where question. how would you describe where you are now? And maybe the words don't come immediately, so stay more with the experience, the nature of how you experience where. It's so rich, and there are so many elements. Take as long as you like. And then what I recommend is to come back as often as possible. You know, one of the guides you can really use is how long does this experience sustain as you go back into your everyday life? The less it sustains, the more you need to keep coming back. It would be like eating, you know. If I don't have enough nourishment, I can't act. So this is the same. This is what supports me being in the world, and my presence supports me acting as well. So let that be your guide. Now, what I can say, if you want some more information, is most of it will come from this. So you will discover, and you will discover appropriately, what has meaning for you in the experience itself, and that is a guide as well. You start to listen to a process that's very natural. It's a very natural form of therapy. If you're busy and really identified with something, preoccupied, come back here with a presence that is more than whatever is going on. Embodiment is not limited to this. Embodiment is also this. There is something more than my body, more than my emotions, more than my mind. So you can check out the Facebook album, which has a lot of articles, but even more directly related, I'm writing a book at the moment about this experience, and particularly how this experience also comes into everyday life in relationship. This will hopefully be out next year. In the meantime, we will hopefully soon be teaching again, and you can check that out also either on Facebook or on LinkedIn to see when those events start running. But thank you very much for joining us, and let's join again. Yes? So come back, and if that's the most important thing you can take, at least take that. We don't take anything, but we take this gift to come back. Not to take, but to share. So thank you.